Hello everyone, this is Dario Pompa. I would like to say thank you to Marco Beato to invite me at the Symposium in Sports Science and Performance. My presentation today will be high-speed running in football and futsal, a contextualized approach. I'm a performance coach and sports scientist, and I'm doing a PhD at the University of Chieti Pescara in Italy. And currently, I'm a performance coach of the Italian national futsal team. My previous experience was in the US, working with Philadelphia Union in Major League Soccer and with Knowles Athletic. I worked with mainly team sport, but also with individual sport. In research, it's difficult to find a clear definition of high-speed running, a clear threshold. The average regarding men it's about 19.8 km per hour. In this presentation, we are going to discuss everything above this kind of threshold. High-speed running is the highest energy and ground reaction force demand action. In fact, looking at the graph on the left by Di Prampero, we can understand that the energy equivalent during this sprint is above 4 times the individual VO2 max. But on the right, we can also see the neuromuscular analysis by the ground reaction force. So from the first step to the last step, we can understand the differences of the ground reaction force. And the last steps, the ground reaction force is over 3 and 4 times the body weight of the athlete. So it's absolutely very, very high strength and force demand. It's very interesting to analyze high-speed running during the last FIFA World Cup in Qatar 2022. First thing, comparing to the previous World Cup in 2018, so only 4 years, we can see on the right that high-speed running improved over 19%, so a very important difference. In this graph, we can see all the teams, the average data compared to each team, summing all players, and the average running was 9,000 meters. If we check the first column, so essentially we see USA running over the other teams. It is interesting also to check Argentina that is in the opposite part. Comparing high-speed running in auto-possession phase to recovery plus defensive transition, well, we see a distribution different compared to the last graph. USA is in this phase, in this part of the graph. So it's meaning that they cover a lot of high-speed running in this particular situation. That is meaning that they are going to running back to defend during the transition phases. But Argentina also we can understand why they run low high speed running compared to other teams. Well, because they receive less negative transitions. Also, looking the relation to high speed run in possession to the first third, well, again we see USA in a good situation. So essentially, USA they run a lot for two reasons. They spent a lot of distance, time, essentially, in the possession in the final third, but also they receive a lot of negative transition. For example, in the opposite, German, that was the fourth in the ranking of total life speed running. In this case, they spent a lot of distance in the final third. That is an interesting type of analysis. Argentina essentially is in the middle. compared to the other teams. So it's clear that it's important to understand what the teams, what the athletes do during the games is not only the total high speed running. So we need to understand what they do in possession, non-possessions, and the particular and individual phases during the games. So essentially from 2018, Bradley and Aid start to analyze this type of contextualized data, this contextualized approach. This is very interesting to go deeper to the match analysis. At the same time, in Italy, Azzone and Lorenzon did a very interesting pilot study during 6 official matches of the Italian under-21 national team. And what they did, so essentially they shared tactical and physical data. In these columns, you can see many types of collective actions, collective phases. In particular, the first two was the higher demanding actions, so the defensive and attacking transitions. For what reason? So for we can see that essentially the athletes, the players spent a lot of energies because many players are involved in these actions. These actions are long and the intensity, because they are essentially running at high speed, it's very demanding for this point of view, comparing to other type of actions, compared, for example, organizing attack, defensive, low, medium block, pressing, etc., etc. This is another interesting approach to analyze high-speed running. In this case, we see data referring to one season, first half, because we have more data in the first half compared to the 90 minutes. And we are going to compare two players, two center backs. Data are referring to duration and not distance. So it's clear the first athlete, the center back number one, covered more duration, more time. He spent more time in high speed running compared to center back number two. Well, in the reality, looking the data by phases, possession, non-possession, and zone, defensive and attacking zone, well, the story is different. So yes, he spent more time in high speed running because essentially 36 seconds of 47 seconds was running in non-possession in defensive zone. So he had to running back more times for many mistakes, individual or collective mistakes, of course, but it's a different story compared to the other center back that spent less time in this type of actions. These data are referring to the same center back that covered less high speed running compared to the other one during some games. And also, looking this blind high speed running data, we can say that the first game it covered more high speed running. He spent more time in high speed running compared to the last game. Well, we have the same problem compared to the previous slide. Yes, the first game he spent a lot of time in high-speed running, but a huge time again in non-possession in defensive zone, compared to the last game that the distribution is completely different and he spent less time in non-possession in defensive zone, but more time in non-possession in attacking zone. So non-possession attacking zone is the pink color. This is another example to give us some interesting example. Same athlete, two different games, Same total duration in high speed running, 64 seconds to 63 seconds. So it's essentially the same, but the distribution was completely different. In the first game, he spent a lot of time, 43 seconds, covering again high speed running in non-possession in defensive zone. But the second game was different. He spent less time in non-possession in defensive zone, but more time in possession in defensive zone. He was a lateral um, defender athlete, so essentially he switched the two phases in the same zone essentially. Here we can see how high speed running change during the season. Those are three games at the beginning, in the middle, and the last part of the season. So essentially, the total amount of high speed running was very similar. There are not important differences. But again, the distributions of high speed running in possession, non possession, and attacking and defensive zone change pretty much, I can say. In particular, again, the darker red, 32 seconds in the first game. In the second game, in the middle of the season, 42 seconds, and at the end of the season, 23 seconds. So these are important things to underline. And also, if we see the possession in defensive zone, and also the possession in attacking zone, they improved. So the total time was the same, but the distribution was more in a good way, I can say, compared to running back to cover um, essentially mistakes or covered zone because the other team is attacking. So it's important how to evaluate high speed running during the season. So only contextualized high speed running during the game. So athletes cover only this type of actions. Well, we found that during one season, again analyzing the first half because we have more data, essentially this team spent 41% of time in non-possession, 40% in possession, and 19% out of play. What does it mean? Meaning that they are not playing. For example, the ball is out for many reasons, and some players had to run at high speed running or above high speed running essentially to cover and to going back to their position. This is the average of the team. But if you check the some specific players, we see that the center backs spent 21% compared to the midfielders that was 12%. So good different compared to the two positions. But that information, well, can give us some ideas regarding how to create high speed running. That could be one of the possibility to create high speed running during the training session based on what we watch in the previous slide. So essentially create high speed running not in a specific context of the game, but in a specific high energy context where they have to sprint after many type of high intensity or medium actions. So that is very important to replicate high speed running in a metabolic context. Okay, now I'm going to discuss the differences between football and futsal regarding high speed running. On the right, we see the distribution of running during a football game. And we have essentially three types of kind of running: standing, walking, jogging, running, and sprinting. Sprinting is it's referring to high speed running. The average distribution between position and and the games is 37% standing and walking, 54% jogging running, and 10% high speed running. In futsal, the differences are clear, essentially for the type of field. Only 4% of the distance was covered in high speed running, 46% was in jogging and running, and 47% in standing and walking. But we need to underline that there are many kind of acceleration, change of directions, deceleration that are at low or very low speed, that so essentially are inside of these kind of actions. Here we have the data of two matches of the Italian national futsal team. First two columns are referring to the opponent team, and here the Italian national team. Interesting. So we have a similar distribution compared to football, meaning we have also here a good amount of time spent in out of play regarding again for the high speed running, but the distribution is different. If you remember, in the football league, in the football season was around 19%. Here, well, we are above that threshold. And also there are differences between games, of course, because only two, but also it's interesting to underline the distribution from possession and non-possession from the opponent team that essentially was very similar compared to us that we spent more time in possession phase. And this is another important point to underline that in this type of game, in this type of sport, we spend less time in high speed running, also if it's not really too far from football, because we need to underline that a game the duration of a game in futsal is 40 minutes. And the average duration of the players are between 20 to 25 minutes of effective time. That could be around half game of football, so 45 minutes. So we need to compare the good amount of time between the two games. Here we can see an example to the possibility to cover high speed running in out of play phase during a futsal game. In futsal, there are a special condition where in a particular part of the game, the coach decide to move the goalkeeper, move out the goalkeeper, and put in the game another player. So essentially, we have a 5 versus 4 movement players. And this is an example where after one action, here we are in possession now, the player going to shoot, the ball goes out, he has to sprint to go out to change his position to the goalkeeper that he, as you showed, sprint back to the door to save and cover the space. Finally, the constraint-led approach could be a useful framework to training high-speed running during the season, during the training session, because modifying some constraints regarding environment, task, or the individual, we can affect the type of high-speed running that we are going to perform during the exercises. Here, the framework to training high-speed running during the training session, and I created this quadrant system where in the cross, in the vertical part, we have the contextual and non-contextual exercises, And in the latter part, on the left, high speed running starts after high energy advance, and high speed running starts after full recovery. How we can read this quadrant? So essentially, in this part, we are going to perform high speed running exercise because there are a lot of recovery between one rep and another rep, and we are not in a contextual situation. So essentially, we are going to sprint, and is the best option to perform high speed running without interference. And we can, for example, looking at the technique, we can try to keep the maximum the speed, and also we have the option to use this type of exercise at the beginning, during, or maybe it's more possible to put this exercise at the end of the training session. Here we have the stage of learn because we are again in the high-speed running starts after full recovery, but we are in a contextual situation. So we are talking about exercises where there are the possibility to recover. So more maybe 1-to-1, 2v2, or maybe exercises in the less number of players. Here we have the more similar situation where the goal is to try to transfer to the game 100% or more, or very similar, because our exercises where high speed running starts after high energy demands, because this is the situation during the game, so we don't have many time full recovery, so many high speed running actions are coming from very types of medium of high intensity actions, and of course in a contextual situation. The last one is try to maintain the speed running uh, movement. So it's again in a non-contextual situation, but again, speed running starts after high energy demands. So could be essentially the circuit that we see in the previous slide. And again, all these four type of exercises can be delivered essentially at the beginning, during, or at the end of the training session. What's the take-home message of this presentation? High speed running across the match is dependent on the game context, primarily by transitions. So during the slides, we saw how high speed running in transitions demands are very intense. So we need to understand if those actions are proactive, so try to attack the space and run in a good way, I can say, compared to a reactive running, so sprinting back because the players did mistakes. So that can change the game analysis. Also, a good percentage of high-speed running appears to be done with ball out of play condition. So that is the reason why it's an ecological way to do high-speed running without a specific game context. But be careful to train high-speed running not only in full recovery conditions. Thank you everyone for the time that you spent to listen my presentation. Bye.